Having your own home is awesome, but it's also a lot of work. The good news? Finding help for your projects is easier than ever. Introducing Angie, the app that puts all your home care needs at your fingertips. Need a pro to fix that emergency leak? Maybe find someone to build a deck, or even set your seasonal tasks on autopilot. Angie can handle all that and more. Expert pros, hundreds of home projects, clear pricing, and the easiest way to book and pay in seconds. This is Angie, your home for everything home. Download the app today.
Going to go over some Nebraska 2021 kickoff times, too. Those were announced here a little bit ago. We'll get that before we get out of the 2 o'clock hour. But time to talk some Husker football and more with Sam McCune of the Omaha World-Herald joining me here on the Limitless Mail Medical Hotline. Sam, I didn't want to get back into this, but I was reading the story about the open public records request for Ohio State and learning that they actually use the word independent. At least it was a question that was brought up. And I was kind of the nerd who got on a couple of college football podcasts to hear if there was any sort of uproar about that, like there was with Nebraska, who didn't even say they were going to go independent, but it was assumed that they were. And it kind of got me thinking, like, the Big Ten, the way that things were handled, I never felt that Kevin Warner, really anybody, sort of poured cold water over some of those flames that were around Nebraska being kicked out of the Big Ten for wanting to leave. And it kind of makes me wonder, going into 2021, if there is still a little bit of animosity with Nebraska in the conference or even some of the other schools with the conference on how decisions have been made and what ultimately maybe needs to happen for there to be more restored confidence in the leadership with the Big Ten. Is that something that you think can change in a positive way as we get back to a little bit more normalcy?
I think the relationships are rocky. So, I think they have meetings or they're going to have meetings soon, but then of course they'll have their meetings in late July when they have media days, which are going to happen. And that'll be an interesting conversation. I think you're going to, see some emotions go, and you'll see some frank statements made. Hold on a second. Warren's going to have to face the media there, and that, it won't be easy. I think you're going to see some people who are really sympathetic to the situation he was in, and I think you're going to see some media that wasn't. Because after what happened with football, there was a lot of other stuff too.
Right.
And, it wasn't just that. And there was a lot of frustration with baseball and with other things. And, do I think Indiana's football program is happy with the Big Ten? I do not.
Mm-hmm.
I do not. I think the rules got changed on Indiana, and they got changed in a way that are very frustrating. Ohio State didn't play the number of games they were supposed to play to make it, and then they changed the rules. Now, do I think they should have made that change? I do. I think that was an appropriate dispensation. Although, let me add that if they had not, and Indiana had played Northwestern, well, then Ohio State was going to play Iowa. If they beat Iowa, they were in the same spot anyway.
Right.
So, I think there's going to be frustration, yeah. And I don't know if it's going to get – I would assume it's going to get better. I think there's always like a presumption on the part of the media that like anything that is bad will improve. I would assume that it would, but I think that's a premature assumption. I think the league actually has to, improve. I can tell you that the Pac-12 commissioner, after about the first 4 or 5 years, he never got it back.
Mm-hmm.
He never got him back. And it didn't get better. It got worse until finally he just left. And so, I think what the Big Ten has is, okay, he's been here a year. It was rocky. Let's try to fix this right now. Barry Alvarez will probably be at Big Ten Media Days in his new role, and he does a great job with the media, and so maybe he'll help. But yeah, I think there's a lot of wounds to mend, to be honest with you. And I'll try to talk to Kevin Warren again this summer, and maybe I'll have a clarity on how things are going there.
Yeah.
He hasn't talked to the media much, but yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of bridges to repair.
Sam, the other thing that I'm curious about is We saw this kind of play out in baseball, and I know it kind of got fans fired up with the no contest against Northwestern, and the fact that at least at the time you thought, boy, it could come down to a half game or a game that could either help or hurt Nebraska. And I respected Northwestern for even coming down and trying to play, but I also understood the frustration. But it, again, kind of goes back to this gray area when a team either has COVID or they say they have it, and maybe there's some injuries that they're just trying to hide. That's the other question I have is, do you feel we'll get more clarity on teams that might get the virus and might have to have a pause, and how that will be handled and adjusted compared to 2020?
Well, from here on out, that's going to be a really interesting issue to go into, because once you are vaccinated, the impact of the virus on, somebody who's vaccinated appears to be very minimal. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, it's rendered kind of like the flu. And I don't know how you handle that. I can tell you that in 2009, players on Nebraska's football team played with the H1N1 flu in the 2009 Missouri game. They did. And I don't know that they should have, but they did. Mm-hmm. And it went down on a separate plane and everything. And, it was a messy deal. And that particular virus hit younger populations harder than older populations. And so, and I wrote about this at the outset of the pandemic, or I think in like maybe June or July, where I kind of laid out the impact of H1N1 and the fact that nobody did anything versus, COVID-19. And so I don't know exactly how the Big Ten is going to play this out, because you do reach a point where, the question you have to ask is, well, if everybody on that playing field has been vaccinated, what is the overriding concern about testing positive for COVID? Like, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. There's a very tiny number of athletes in the Big Ten who had any sort of signs of myocarditis. But remember, that was contracting the vaccine. That was contracting the virus without a vaccine that taught their body how to fight it. And so post-vaccination, like if somebody gets the flu shot and then they get the flu, they don't keep them home.
Right.
They play if they can. So that's the real question, is how they're going to look at a positive test. Are they going to look at it as like, oh my goodness, quarantine? Or are they going to say, well, we're moving back to a status where if you have it and you can go about your day with it, then we're just going to let you have it.
Yeah.
That was the original Scott Frost vision all the way back in like July. I mean, it was like, if somebody tests positive for it, quarantine them. But if they're not showing symptoms, then we just have to go with it, or it's going to be a mess. And Frost was right. His initial diagnosis of how things were going to go was correct. I mean, his philosophy was, you either just let this thing happen and you kind of let players play until they show symptoms, or you're going to have a mess. And it kind of turned out that way. I mean, it was pretty messy. And, so he was prescient in that way. And I'm not saying that, like, I'm not trying to diminish the threat of COVID or anything like that.
Right.
But there is an irony in the fact that the Big Ten decided to postpone play of its football league. And by the time it was in the full swing of its league, like in November, December, was the worst time for the pandemic. Mm-hmm. They postponed it during one of the lower times. So lessons have been learned. We'll see how things are handled. I expect full capacity crowds this fall for anybody who wants to have them, and the local health departments allow it. And, so I think some things will change. But the question you just asked there, I don't have a definitive answer to.
Yeah. Talking with Sam McKim of the Omaha World Herald. Sam, I wanted to get just maybe a little breakdown of this week's Stat Chat, too, because you're covering a topic that even during the offseason, it gets so much conversation on radio shows, amongst the media members, and it's always about recruiting, always about the talent, what talent could be coming
Yeah.
in, what talent currently exists on the team. And you kind of look at the publications, the recruiting process, or the recruiting rankings from the different publications. What did you kind of do to break things down, and what did you kind of learn?
Well, I think Nebraska's talent level is about a quarter of the guys on the team are 4 stars. They don't have any 5 stars. Almost everybody else is 3. So that's a basic snapshot. There's a little bit more top-end talent on offense than there is defense. It is generally balanced, except for ESPN, which has more 4 stars on defense than it does on offense. And, yeah. So I think that's kind of where it's at. That people – so, let's think about this for a second. Nebraska signed 3 straight top 20 classes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right? 2019,
Yep.
2020, and 2021. I told you that. Would you think only a quarter of the team was 4-star players?
No, I would assume more.
Yeah, but it's that. Now, some of that is attrition, okay? Some of that's got Wendell Robinson left. A few other guys left.
Mm-hmm.
Some 4 stars left, But some of that is, let me pull you in on the gap, the true gap. And I didn't get into this much because I don't want to make people feel bad all the time. Let me tell you the gap between Nebraska and Ohio State. It's remarkable. More than half of Ohio State's team is 4 stars. And then I think it's somewhere around, 15, 20% or 5 stars.
Yep.
We're not talking about the same kinds of programs here.
All right.
And Ohio State's in the top 5 in recruiting, and then Nebraska's in the top 20. And I'm just telling you there's a difference. There is a huge – people taught what we have long been led to believe is if you're in the top 25 in recruiting classes, then you should be a top 25 team.
Right.
And I haven't done all the legwork, so it's premature for me to say, but one of the long-term things I'm working on is how different really is the number 21 class from the number 41 class. And how different is that compared to the 21 to the 1?
Yeah.
And my suspicion is that the difference between 5 and 15 is larger than the difference between 15 and 35.
Yep.
So we've long had this sense of like, well, they're in the top 20. I don't think it makes that much difference. I think there's an echelon that you can get into, that top 10, and then all of a sudden the talent it just explodes. But if you're from 17 to 30, I don't think there's much difference between those recruiting classes. And I don't think there's much difference between 30 and 50.
Yeah.
It comes down to coaching. It comes down to development. It comes down to character. It comes down to the intangibles. And I think we've talked for a long time about talent. And honestly, that's the thing I want to look into, because my hunch is there's about 8 programs out there that are really recruiting at a level that makes a talent difference. I think a lot of the other teams are actually jumbled, bunched into a big middle,
Mm-hmm.
and the difference becomes coaching and development,
Yep.
and not necessarily the recruits.
No question. Sam McKewon with the Omaha World Herald. Again, the Stat Chat this week covers a lot of that. Check it out, the Omaha World Herald, omaha.com. Sam, appreciate it, man. Have a great weekend.
You bet. Thanks, man.
All right, when we come back, going to give you some of those kickoff times for 2021. Will Nebraska-Illinois be a night game, a party in Champaign? It's not a night game. We'll tell you when that game will kick off and some other ones next.